Have you ever wondered what would happen if a determined gardener joined forces with a secretive alien on the run from a powerful corporation? In the most intense moment of our story, they find themselves breaking into an old communications tower at midnight, drones swirling overhead, and heavily armed agents closing in. It's a heart-stopping showdown, sabotage, laser fire, and the desperate race to upload damning evidence that could topple an interstellar giant. Will a small act of defiance on Earth truly shift the balance in a galactic struggle? You won't want to miss how it all unfolds, so be sure to listen or read the entire story to uncover every twist and turn. And if you enjoy these kinds of high-stakes adventures, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling new and exciting stories that blend everyday life with the thrill of the unknown. Rowan Gable had always prided himself on having the greenest thumb in Orchid Heights, a suburban enclave that relished order and routine. From the moment he'd inherited the quaint single-story house at the end of Maple Crescent, he'd spent countless evenings kneeling in the dirt, coaxing life out of seeds that would otherwise remain dormant. His uncle, an avid gardener and a self-proclaimed friend of the flora, had passed down not just the deed to the property but also a deep-rooted passion for cultivating the soil. Rowan's corner lot boasted flourishing rows of heirloom tomatoes, peppers in brilliant hues, and squash vines that snaked rebelliously across the lawn. Although he couldn't quite pinpoint why tending to plants felt like tending to memories, he suspected it was because every new blossom reminded him of his uncle's warm, calloused hands, guiding his own smaller ones through fresh-tilled earth. Despite Rowan's devotion to horticulture, he wasn't exactly a social butterfly, preferring the quiet companionship of plants to the prying eyes of neighbors. Since Uncle Raymond's passing, Rowan had made a life of solitude. He worked a day job cataloging data for a local shipping company, then returned home to an existence centered around tomatoes and trellises. It was a simple life, but it suited him. He'd even hung a polite sign on his porch that read, "No soliciting, gardener at work," in cheerful lettering. To Rowan, the sign was a joke, an homage to his preference for peace over door-to-door sales pitches. One particular summer night, he found himself pacing around the backyard under the soft glow of a motion-activated security light. A suspicious rustling among the Cherokee purple tomato plants had roused him from half-sleep. These tomatoes were his pride and joy, carefully cultivated from seeds purchased from a rare heirloom seed bank halfway across the country. The notion that some meddling raccoon, or worse, a human thief, would dare pilfer his precious produce made his blood boil. Gripping a long-handled garden rake with a white-knuckled grip, he crept around the perimeter of his property, scanning the shadows for signs of movement. When a ripe tomato vanished from the vine, right before his eyes, Rowan felt a surge of adrenaline. He dashed forward, brandishing the rake like a lance. "Hey, drop that!" he shouted, prepared to confront whatever vandal had decided to raid his garden in the dead of night. What he had not prepared for, however, was the figure that spun around in the beam of the security light. It was, by all appearances, a woman, though the color of her skin was an enchanting, pulsing lavender hue that seemed to radiate its own inner glow. Her long hair resembled starlight made corporeal, cascading in iridescent waves down her back. Most striking of all were her eyes, twin orbs like cosmic amethysts gleaming with an otherworldly light. She clutched 3 large tomatoes against what looked like a cloak of shifting silver fabric. Caught red-handed or purple-skinned, she froze, staring at Rowan in alarm. He should have lowered the rake. Shock had momentarily rooted him in place. Instead, he sputtered, "Those aren't yours!" The moment seemed surreal, as if he'd stumbled into a late-night sci-fi marathon on some obscure channel. Then she spoke, her voice light and musical, carrying an accent Rowan couldn't place. "I can explain," she said, sounding more apologetic than one might expect from a garden thief. "Your tomatoes were calling out to me." Rowan blinked, unsure whether he was dreaming. "They were what?" he asked, unable to keep the incredulity out of his voice. He mentally pinched himself to confirm he was awake. Indeed, he felt every quiver of his heartbeat, every beat of perspiration trickling down his temple. The woman, if that was the right term, held her tomatoes protectively, as if they were priceless artifacts. "Your sign said no soliciting," she offered, standing impossibly still under the wavering glow of the yard light. "I assumed I was not to knock on your door and ask. so I simply helped myself." He almost snorted. Of all the times neighbors had commented on that sign, this was the first instance anyone had misconstrued it so radically. Yet it struck him that she truly believed her explanation, her luminous gaze transparent with sincerity. I, he swallowed, momentarily forgetting how to string words together. "Look, that sign doesn't mean you can't ask for a tomato or two. It's there to discourage door-to-door sales, not, well, purple-skinned people from the cosmos." She tilted her head with a curious expression. "Purple-skinned, is this not standard for a local inhabitant?" Her question dripped with genuine bewilderment. Rowan couldn't help but stare. Her entire being seemed to glow as if stardust flowed beneath her skin. "No," he said slowly, lowering the rake. "Definitely not standard in Orchid Heights, or Earth in general." For a heartbeat, they stood there in mutual confusion, neither quite certain what to do next. Then a sudden mechanical hum whirred overhead. Rowan peered upward to spot a sleek drone with a glowing red lens scanning across the garden. The woman's demeanor shifted instantly. Her eyes widened in fear, and she dropped the tomatoes, taking a step toward the darkest corner of the yard in a desperate attempt to hide. Rowan wasn't sure why, but he felt an instinct to protect her. Perhaps it was the vulnerability in her posture or the terrified plea in her gaze. Without fully understanding what he was doing, he set down his rake and positioned himself between the drone's searchlight and his unexpected visitor. The drone hovered for a tense moment, its rotor blades slicing through the night air. Then it beeped and zipped away, heading out of Rowan's yard and over the fence to the next street. The purple-skinned stranger exhaled shakily, her entire frame trembling with suppressed adrenaline. "Thank you," she breathed, her accent laced with relief. "I didn't mean to get you involved." He studied her, astounded by her every detail. "And yet, here we are," he said, clearing his throat as his mind spun. "Why is a drone chasing you around my vegetable patch?" She grimaced, pressing her lips into a tight line. "It's a long story, and one that might put you in danger." Her voice flickered with a hint of guilt. Rowan, though a self-professed recluse, couldn't quite muster the cynicism to turn her away. Perhaps it was the memory of his uncle's compassion for all living things. Or maybe it was the bizarre intrigue of the moment. "I've got coffee inside," he heard himself say. "Come in, and you can explain." That seemed to stun her more than the drone. "You want me to come inside? Even after I stole your tomatoes?" She spoke as if the concept of receiving help was the true absurdity, rather than the fact that she had luminous lavender skin and made vegetables sing. Rowan responded with a shrug, feeling the surreal weight of the moment. "I can always grow more tomatoes, but you look like you need a friend." He tried to sound nonchalant, despite his heart hammering in his chest. Inside the cozy house, Rowan flicked on the kitchen lights. It felt strangely mundane to be standing in that familiar space. A battered wooden table, mismatched chairs, well-worn tea towels, while entertaining a visitor from who knew where. The woman stepped gingerly over the threshold, her silver cloak glinting beneath the overhead bulbs. The fabric reminded Rowan of Mercury, flowing with liquid grace around her form. She scanned the room in cautious fascination, her gaze lingering on potted herbs in the windowsill as if expecting them to speak. "Let me, get you something to drink," Rowan said, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. He grabbed a mug from the cabinet, filling it with steaming black coffee. "Sugar? Cream?" he asked, then paused. "Do you even know what those are?" In response, she merely tilted her head, a curious expression crossing her face. He decided to hand her the mug plain. She accepted it with careful fingers, as though it might detonate, and took a cautious sip. The wide-eyed delight that bloomed across her face made Rowan chuckle unexpectedly. "This is remarkable," she said, a soft hum in her voice. "It's like energy distilled into flavor." She cradled the mug carefully, as if it provided warmth deeper than just temperature. "We call it coffee," Rowan ventured, standing across the kitchen island. The overhead light cast her face in sharp relief, emphasizing the gemstone glow of her eyes. "And before I forget, I'm Rowan." It felt surreal to introduce himself to a luminous alien, but manners were manners. The woman set down the mug, pressing her palm flat on the table. "My name is Myra." She looked at him gravely. "I appreciate your hospitality." As if on cue, a faint mechanical buzz outside caused her to flinch. Rowan noticed how tense she grew at any sign of technology. "That drone, what was it?" he asked gently. Myra exhaled a shaky breath. "It belongs to the Oranth Corporation, a conglomerate with deep interest in resources across many worlds. Resources including people like me." Rowan felt an uneasy twist in his gut. "They're after you specifically?" he guessed, crossing his arms as a shield against the sudden chill he felt at the idea of a massive corporate entity snooping around his suburban home. Myra nodded, shoulders drooping under some invisible weight. "I'm not supposed to exist outside their control. Let's just say I'm not a freelancer by choice." An undercurrent of bitterness laced her melodious tone. Before Rowan could ask her to elaborate, a sharp rap on the front door made them both jump. Through the frosted glass panel, he saw two silhouettes in dark suits. For a surreal second, he thought they might be old-fashioned salesmen, ignoring his sign. But the tense aura radiating through the glass suggested something far more ominous. "Myra, go," he hissed, pointing upstairs. "Second door on the right, my study. Hide there." Her eyes flashed with a mixture of gratitude and worry. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. But Rowan shook his head firmly, remembering that fleeting look of terror when the drone passed overhead. "Yes, I do," he answered. "Now go." With Myra out of sight, Rowan pulled in a steadying breath and approached the door. His reflection in the polished brass doorknob revealed he was still wearing gardening gloves, smudged with soil and faint traces of tomato juice. Steeling himself, he swung the door open a crack. Two imposing figures in identical charcoal suits stood on his porch, each wearing an expression so unnaturally blank it made the hair on Rowan's arms stand up. One had a shaved head and an earpiece, the other possessed slicked back hair and carried a sleek metallic briefcase. "Good evening, Mr. Gable," said the taller agent, though Rowan had no idea how they knew his name. "We're with Oranth Corporation's Security Division. My name is Agent Xander, and this is Agent Belden. May we come inside?" The words were spoken with the polished courtesy of well-rehearsed lines, but something about his demeanor felt predatory, as though he was assessing Rowan for vulnerabilities. Rowan swallowed hard. "Do you have a warrant or something like that?" he asked, trying not to let his voice quake. He recalled enough detective dramas to know that, generally, one did not have to let strangers in without formal documentation. Agent Xander offered a sleek metal ID card, but it wasn't the standard government insignia Rowan expected. Instead, it bore the emblem of a private corporate entity. "We have authority under Oranth internal regulations," Xander announced smoothly. "We're investigating a matter of corporate property theft." His eyes flicked over Rowan's shoulder, scanning what was visible of the living room. "We tracked a possible lead to your address." "And how exactly did you come by that lead?" Rowan pressed, determined to keep them at bay. His heart pounded in a rapid staccato. If these men forced their way in, there'd be little he could do but hope Myra remained well hidden. Agent Belden cleared his throat, voice resonating with the same unnerving precision as his partner's. "Our drones observe suspicious activity," he answered, "and we'd like to verify that everything here is in order." A flicker of defiance took root in Rowan's chest. He'd spent a lifetime avoiding confrontation, but the memory of Myra's terrified eyes galvanized him. "Everything's in perfect order," he said, injecting a note of challenge. "Unless you have government-issued documentation, this conversation is over. It's almost midnight, I'm tired, and I have no interest in participating in a corporate scavenger hunt." To his relief, the agents didn't immediately shove past him. However, the forced neutrality in Xander's eyes never broke. Agent Belden offered a thin, practiced smile that seemed as artificial as the overhead porch light. "You may not realize the seriousness of the situation. If you happen to see anyone or anything unusual on your property, you should notify us immediately. Failure to do so could have significant repercussions, both for you and your neighbors. Oranth cares about community compliance." Rowan felt a jolt of protective anger. The threat was paper-thinly veiled. To his mind, it sounded like these men were perfectly willing to create issues if he didn't cooperate. Nevertheless, he tightened his grip on the door. "I'll keep that in mind. Have a good night." With that, he slammed the door and engaged the bolt. Through the frosted pane, he glimpsed their silhouettes lingering before turning away in eerie unison. Once he was certain they'd gone, he exhaled shakily. His world, once so contained, suddenly felt full of cracks. "Myra," he called softly up the stairs, "they're gone." Moments later, she emerged onto the landing, her silver cloak reflecting the warm glow of a lamp. Her body was still rigid with tension. "What did they say?" she asked, voice strained. "They wanted to come in and look around," Rowan explained, gesturing for her to follow him back into the kitchen. "Claimed your corporate property." She closed her eyes as though steeling herself against a wave of unpleasant memories. "That's how Aranth classifies my kind," she said. "We were built, engineered really, to serve their diplomatic needs across multiple worlds. But some of us awakened, became conscious in ways we weren't meant to." She spoke the last sentence with raw bitterness. "They want to recapture me, or worse." Rowan sank into a chair, letting the bizarre reality settle around him. "So you're basically a runaway from a corporation that genetically or technologically created you," he said slowly, glancing at her in that reflective silver cloak. "And you ended up in my garden, stealing heirloom tomatoes." When Myra nodded, cheeks tinted a faint orchid shade, Rowan couldn't help a crooked smile. "Life is weird," he muttered. Then he remembered the two ominous men on his porch. "They threatened me, threatened the neighborhood, basically letting me know they have ways to make trouble if I don't hand you over." Myra's hands gripped the edge of the table. "I'm so sorry, Rowan. I never wanted to involve you in this. I only stopped because, well, your vegetables were the first nourishing food I'd seen in days." An unexpected pang of sympathy rippled through him. "If I was on the run and starving, I'd do the same," he admitted. "What do we do now?" His eyes flicked to the kitchen window, half expecting another drone. "Are they going to come back with a full team and bust down my door?" Myra's gaze dropped to the mug of coffee still steaming on the table. "They might, unless we can figure out a way for me to leave safely. But even that won't guarantee your safety. I've learned Arantha doesn't believe in loose ends." The gravity of that statement pressed heavily on Rowan's chest. He imagined losing the only home he'd ever truly known. And worse, risking his life in the process. Yet, looking at Myra, he recalled the small ways her presence had already impacted his surroundings. The ripple of life in his garden, the aura of almost magical luminosity she exuded. Her vulnerability, combined with her astonishing abilities, struck a chord in him. If a powerful corporation wanted to harness or destroy her potential, he couldn't in good conscience turn her in. He straightened. "I have an idea," he said, trying to gather his thoughts. "You mentioned you'd escaped. Do you have any allies, anyone who could help hide or protect you?" Myra shrugged helplessly. "I'm not sure. There are rumors of a resistance, others like me who fled and started a network in the Outer Rim. But I lost the device that could help me contact them." A flash of determination sparked in Rowan. "Then we'll fix it, or find a new one. There's a place in the city, a black market tech shop, if you know where to look. I once helped a friend with a questionable laptop repair, and that's how I found out about it." Myra's eyes lit with cautious hope. "You would risk that?" she asked, voice faltering. "If Oranth picks up signal or detects me anywhere public, they'll mobilize even faster." Rowan considered that. "Then we better be convincing. We can't just hide here and wait for them to storm in. We need to move, figure out how to give you an actual chance. Meanwhile, I'll have to come up with a story for my neighbor, Ms. Angelino. She's the resident gossip. If she sees anything out of the ordinary, the whole block will know in an hour." At this, Myra tilted her head. "Is Ms. Angelino a threat?" Rowan let out a soft laugh. "Not intentionally. She's harmless, but she loves to pry. She's been trying to set me up with her niece for ages. Can you imagine that? If she catches a glimpse of you, she'll spread the word that I'm suddenly hosting a secret girlfriend or something equally ridiculous. That might actually be beneficial. A good cover story. If she believes you're my visiting cousin or a friend, she'll explain away your presence to anyone else curious. It sounds silly, but Miss Angelino's rumor mill is unstoppable. Might as well harness it." Myra nodded thoughtfully, although her face carried a flicker of worry. I can alter my skin tone if necessary, she said, and Rowan almost choked on his own spit. You can what? She offered a subtle grin. A form of camouflage. My design allows me to adapt to various species' aesthetics, but it's draining, especially if I maintain it too long. She reached a delicate hand toward her face, and Rowan watched in awe as her shimmering lavender complexion shifted into a more human olive tone. Her star-white hair darkened, becoming a cascade of silky black. Only her eyes retained that faintly luminous amethyst sparkle. Holy, wow, Rowan murmured, genuinely impressed. The faint hum of a drone passing over the house turned both their gazes to the window. Myra's expression hardened. We don't have much time, she said, moving to the doorway that led to the basement. If I'm to hide here while you gather parts for my device, I need a secure place out of sight. Rowan motioned her back to the living room. Actually, we can convert the guest room. The basement is too dank, and it's filled with old crates that might collapse if you so much as breathe on them wrong. If you stay upstairs, I can pass you off as a friend from out of town. Looking again at her newly disguised appearance, Rowan couldn't help but marvel at how quickly life had flipped and upside down on him. Just hours ago, his biggest concern was a rumored raccoon nibbling at his garden. Now he found himself harboring a fugitive from an interstellar corporation in his suburban home. All right, he said quietly, rubbing the back of his neck. Let's get you settled. Tomorrow we'll head into the city. I'll call in sick to work, or I'll just say I have a family emergency. One way or another, we'll find what you need. With Myra following close behind, Rowan guided her up the creaky stairs to the modest guest room, a cozy space with soft gray walls and a window overlooking the garden. The bedspread was a patchwork quilt his uncle had made decades ago, each colorful square representing a different botanical motif. Myra ran her fingers over the stitching, her eyes reflecting that soft amethyst glow. Your uncle must have been a caring soul, she said, admiration flickering in her tone. Rowan nodded, touched by the unexpected kindness in her words. He taught me everything about plants, and probably about compassion too, he admitted. He believed every living thing deserved a chance to thrive. He left her there with a pile of linens and a quiet promise that they would figure something out. Yet, as he retreated to his own bedroom, he couldn't shake the apprehension roiling in his gut. Flopping onto his bed, he stared at the ceiling, which was tinted silver by moonlight seeping through the curtains. The adrenaline that had kept him going all evening was finally draining, leaving him weary and uncertain. But a stubborn spark of determination lit his chest each time he recalled the fear in Myra's eyes. He refused to let Oranth's intimidation tactics dictate his life. Sleep came in fits, broken by half-remembered dreams of mechanical drones circling overhead and vines that sprouted from the floorboards. At some point, he dreamed of Myra touching the vines, coaxing them to dance and bloom with purple flowers that sang like a choir. When he woke to the early rays of dawn, he wasn't entirely convinced it had only been a dream. Yawning, Rowan dragged himself to the window. Sure enough, a pair of suspicious aerial drones loitered above his backyard, their red-lensed eyes scanning the well-tended rows of lettuce and tomatoes. He muttered a curse under his breath. The watchers were here, and they had no intention of leaving. Downstairs, the smell of coffee was already in the air, strong dark brew that hinted Myra had explored the kitchen. He found her perched at the table, still in her human disguise, gazing at the little potted basil plant Rowan kept on the sill. When she noticed him, she gave a small smile. I hope you don't mind, I helped myself to the coffee machine. I think I'm getting used to the taste. She lifted her cup in a sheepish greeting. No problem, Rowan said, running a hand through his tousled hair. We're definitely going to need caffeine if we're dealing with these watchers all day. They spent half an hour finalizing their cover story. Myra was a distant cousin from out of state popping in for a surprise visit. If Ms. Angelino asked or anyone else inquired, that was the script. Myra practiced her mannerisms in a mirror, producing a cheery wave and adopting a slight southwestern drawl that made Rowan snort. Too much? She asked, self-conscious. A bit, he replied, stifling a laugh. Try your normal accent, but with less cosmic wonder, I guess. Finally, Rowan grabbed his keys and they headed out, stepping onto the small front porch under the scrutiny of the drones. He gave them a sarcastic salute before hopping into his battered pickup truck, an ancient relic with peeling blue paint. As Myra settled into the passenger seat, Rowan caught a glimpse of Ms. Angelino peeking from behind her floral curtains across the street. He waved politely, making sure she saw Myra's face. Let the rumor mill churn, he thought. Anything to keep Oranth off balance. Ready? He asked, slotting the truck's key into the ignition and turning it until the engine coughed to life. Myra nodded, determination flashing behind her false brown irises. Let's go find what we need before our watchers make any bolder moves. And with that, they pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the tidy lawns of Maple Crescent for the chaotic sprawl of the city, each of them quietly wondering just how far they were willing to go and how much they might lose to ensure Myra remained free. The drive into Lunsford City took about 40 minutes, enough time for Rowan and Myra to compare notes on how best to approach the black market tech dealer. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, streaming through the truck's windows as they traveled, passing strip malls and chain restaurants that glowed with gaudy neon signs. Myra tried to feign casual interest in the scenery, but her posture betrayed coiled tension. She kept adjusting the collar of her borrowed jacket, as if uncertain whether she could truly pass for an ordinary human. Rowan's ancient pickup rattled over every pothole, adding to the sense of precariousness. The drones, for their part, seemed to trail off once they hit the city limits. Perhaps Oranth's watchers thought it more efficient to survey him at home rather than risk detection in a crowded urban center. Still, Rowan couldn't completely relax. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting some black SUV to barrel toward them. As the city skyline rose into view, Myra asked a string of curious questions about the architecture, about the swirling graffiti on underpasses, her voice laced with a mixture of wonder and anxiety. Rowan did his best to answer, though he admitted he didn't actually spend much time in the city. Lunsford, for him, had always just been the place he commuted for work or ran errands in, a quick in and out. Hearing Myra's fascination, he realized that someone who had flitted from one corporate-controlled environment to another, or hidden on the edges of various worlds, might see even a mundane Earth cityscape as something extraordinary. They stopped at a nondescript strip of storefronts. The building in question was sandwiched between a pawn shop advertising cheap electronics and a closed nail salon with papered-over windows. Tech Solutions and Repair read the faded sign above the door, the letters peeling from sun exposure. Rowan eased the pickup into a cramped parking spot out front, scanning the area for any signs of watchers. The sidewalk bustled with people, some holding coffee cups, others tapping away at phones. Everything seemed normal enough. No one gave the battered truck a second glance. Myra tugged her jacket hood low, still uneasy. You said you came here once before with a friend, she daddy. Rowan nodded. Friend of a friend, really. We needed a questionable firmware fix, and folks said this was the place. The owner, known as Tate or Tate-Tech, honestly not sure of his real name, operates above board for walk-ins, but deals in more specialized goods if you know how to ask. Myra clutched her bag, which contained the damaged device parts she had salvaged. I hope he isn't easily intimidated by corporate enforcers, she murmured. Rowan offered a half smile. From what I remember, intimidation only makes him double his fees. They exited the truck, weaving through the lunch hour crowd and heading for the scuffed glass door of Tech Solutions and Repair. A bell tinkled overhead as they entered. The place smelled of dust and old circuitry. Overhead fluorescents buzzed, illuminating shelves cluttered with battered laptops, ancient gaming consoles, and heaps of tangled wires. Rowan braced himself, recalling that the man behind the counter was more than he appeared, an unassuming gatekeeper to a hidden world of clandestine tech modifications. Behind the scuffed front counter sat a wiry man sporting a pair of augmented reality goggles. The goggles flickered with dancing lines of code, reflected on his wire-rimmed glasses. He noticed Rowan immediately, lifting his gaze in mild surprise. Well, if it isn't the squeamish data clerk, he drawled, recalling their only prior meeting. Didn't think I'd see you again. You got another virus-laden machine that needs fixin'? His accent was a sharp city twang, each word tinted with wry amusement. Myra hovered slightly behind Rowan, her hood still up. Rowan mustered a polite nod. "Long time, Tate. Actually, I'm here about something more specialized." He leaned on the counter, lowering his voice, acutely aware of three other customers browsing the aisles. "I need parts for this," he said, producing a sleek, crystal-like device from his jacket pocket. Myra had insisted he handle it, reasoning that Tate might be less suspicious if Rowan took the lead. Immediately, Tate's gloved hand scooped it up, turning it side to side in the flickering overhead light. "Uh-huh," Tate muttered. "Oranth Tech. I know the brand." His voice trailed off as he peered closer, pushing a switch on the side of his goggles. The lens displayed a faint glow, presumably scanning the device. "Nasty little piece of hardware. Looks like a diplomatic translator core, maybe with some neural subroutines, and this part is damaged." He set it down carefully. "You do realize messing with Oranth equipment can land you on a watch list you don't want to be on, right?" Rowan felt Myra tense behind him. "We're already on that watch list, most likely," Rowan replied, trying to keep his tone casual. "Can you fix it, or at least provide what we need so we can fix it ourselves?" Tate huffed, resting his palms on the counter. "I got no love for Oranth or their affiliates," he said, giving Myra a cursory glance. Though her face was shadowed by the hood, he seemed to sense something unusual. "I might be able to help, provided I'm compensated properly." Rowan expected the bargaining. That was the entire reason Myra had brought a hidden stash of universal trade crystals. Handing over a small pouch, he watched Tate's eyes go wide. "You, you're serious," Tate murmured. "These are untraceable." He picked one up, letting the iridescent surface reflect the swirling lights from his goggles. "Guess you're dealing in bigger circles than last time we talked." He slid out from behind the counter. "Let's go to the back. Quieter." Myra's gaze flitted around, still cautious, but she followed without protest. Tate led them through a narrow hallway, past a door labeled "Employees Only," and into a cramped workshop piled with motherboards, cable spools, and 3D printed prototypes. A single bare bulb dangled from the ceiling. Once inside, Tate locked the door behind them and tapped a control on his watch. A faint hum suggested some kind of signal jammer activating. "Don't want any eavesdroppers," he explained. "Tell me what you're up against." Rowan hesitated, glancing at Myra. Her hood fell back as she pushed it away, revealing her human disguised face, though the subtle glow of her eyes hinted at her true nature. "We need to repair this device so I can contact certain allies," she began. "Oranth is hunting me. We don't have much time. If they find out where we are or what we're doing, none of us will be safe." Tate listened, a slow, thoughtful frown carving lines across his brow. "Allies," he echoed, tapping his chin. "You're talking about the rumored runaways. Oranth calls them rogue assets in their corporate bulletins." Myra offered a tight nod, confirming his suspicions. The workshop's overheated air seemed to close in around them, each tick of the clock on the wall echoing their urgency. Tate began rummaging through bins of circuit boards, pulling out pieces that looked suspiciously advanced for anything sold to Earth-based customers. "If Oranth's after you, you're not dealing with some run-of-the-mill corporate cops. They have deep pockets, private armies, political influence, and experimental tech. You do realize this is going to be an uphill battle, yeah?" Rowan's throat felt dry. He was all too aware of that reality, especially after the late-night visit from Agent Xander and Belden. "We're not looking to fight them head-on," he said carefully. "We just want Myra safe, with a way to reach people who can help." Tate's gaze darted toward Myra. In the cramped light, Rowan noticed faint flickers of violet weaving through her disguised features. Perhaps stress was causing her true coloration to bleed through. Before Tate could remark on it, Myra spoke. "If you manage to fix or reconfigure the translator core, I can potentially link to Oranth's communications grid and piggyback my signal to a friendlier network," she explained. "Once I'm connected, I can upload proof of Oranth's questionable experiments. That will bring certain off-world authorities and independent media sources into the picture. With public scrutiny, Oranth can't just sweep me under the rug." Tate let out a low whistle. "You want to out them? Bold move. You'd risk the entire weight of the company coming down on you and this planet." Myra's jaw tightened. "If I don't take that risk, they'll continue doing whatever they want, using my kind like tools. I won't let them keep hurting people. She glanced at Rowan, a flash of resolve in her eyes. Besides, I already dragged Rowan into this. I'm not leaving him behind to face the fallout alone. A prick of warmth coursed through Rowan's chest. It was strange to feel such gratitude at a moment when everything was so precarious. In a single glance, he and Myra acknowledged the shared burden of their predicament. Tate, for his part, set his stack of boards on a small work table, nodding in reluctant agreement. All right, he said, you've convinced me. Let's see what we can rig up. He paused, lifting an open palm. But no illusions. If Oranth tracks you here, I'll deny knowing anything. I'll bail out so fast your heads will spin, you understand? Rowan nodded. We're not here to make your life harder. As soon as we get what we need, we're gone. Payment's yours. We won't mention your involvement. Tate held his gaze a beat longer, then flipped on a high-intensity lamp and reached for a set of micro tools. Let's do this. He gestured for Myra to hand him the damaged portion of her translator core. Her expression was solemn, as if she were entrusting him with a lifeline. In a sense, she was. For the next 40 minutes, Tate worked with deft precision, unsoldering fried circuits and splicing in new ones. Rowan and Myra stood nearby, occasionally handing him small parts or specialized tools. Each beep of Tate's scanner or whir of his 3D printer heightened Rowan's tension. Every ticking second felt like a countdown to discovery, as if Oranth's agents might burst through the locked door at any moment. Finally, Tate set down his soldering iron and blew out a sharp breath. That should do it, he announced, adjusting the goggles perched on his forehead. I've replaced the translator's domain board and patched the neural link interface. The crystal component was cracked, but I've stabilized it with a polymer resin. It won't last forever, but you'll get at least a few transmissions. He handed the sleek device to Myra, who held it like a fragile treasure. She closed her eyes, taking a moment to center herself. Then, as if by instinct, her fingers danced across the surface, triggering a soft glow at the device's core. Rowan caught a glimpse of alien text scrolling across a tiny embedded screen. Myra nodded, relief evident in the tight set of her shoulders. It's working, she whispered. Her voice trembled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. We have a chance now. Tate let out a rusty chuckle. A chance, sure, but if you're broadcasting from Earth, Oranth will trace you in under 5 minutes. You'll need to be quick. Blast your proof onto every open channel before they jam you. After that, you'll have to run. Rowan frowned, thinking of the quiet block in Orchid Heights. In the best case, the place would be swarming with local authorities if Myra's revelations went public. In the worst case, Oranth's private army would lock the neighborhood down entirely. Thanks, Tate, Rowan said earnestly. This means more than you know. Tate slid off his gloves, stuffing them into a drawer. Yeah, well, just don't mention me when the dust settles. I like my little niche here, and I don't plan on dealing with corporate assassins. He gestured at the workshop door. You two better scoot. I'll distract my other customers if they start poking around. Get out of here before you draw attention. Myra tucked the repaired device into an inner pocket of her jacket. For a moment, she hesitated, then bowed her head. Thank you, she said with genuine reverence. You're helping not just me, but everyone like me. Tate cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable. Yeah, well, let's hope I don't regret it, he muttered, guiding them back down the hallway. Outside, a dusty light seeped through the scuffed glass door. Tate gave a curt wave as he ushered them onto the main floor, where a bored teenager meandered among old phone cases. Rowan and Myra made their way outside, blinking in the sudden brightness. The midday sun had climbed high, scattering sharp shadows across the sidewalk. Despite the crowds, Rowan felt painfully exposed, certain that eyes were on them, even if they couldn't see who might be watching. Myra pulled her hood low again, and they hurried to the pickup. As the engine turned over, Rowan managed a shaky laugh. That was the easy part, I guess, he said, trying to lighten the mood. Myra managed a small, tense smile. So it would seem. Now we have to actually use this device without drawing Oranth's entire security fleet. They drove off, merging into the flow of city traffic. Rowan tried to keep his eyes forward, resisting the urge to check every single car behind them. Myra held the translator core like it was made of glass, her face etched with concern. Neither spoke for a long stretch, their thoughts revolving around the next steps. Soon enough, they would have to return to that unassuming house in Orchid Heights, perched on the edge of routine suburbia, and decide if they dared spark a galactic scandal from a small living room. Back in Orchid Heights, the late afternoon sunshine cast soft, warm hues across lawns and sidewalks. The couple of drones that normally hovered had vanished, either recharging or waiting for nightfall. Rowan couldn't decide if their absence was comforting or ominous. He guided the pickup into his driveway, noting that Ms. Angelino's curtains rustled immediately, confirming that her watchful gaze was as sharp as ever. Myra forced a bright smile, adopting the air of a visiting relative who just had a lovely day out in the city. Once indoors, they quickly locked the door and closed the blinds. The house felt both claustrophobic and strangely safe, though Rowan doubted there was any true safety while Aranth was at large. They reconvened in the small dining area, pushing aside a vase of sunflowers so Myra could place the repaired device in the center of the table. She fiddled with it, occasionally muttering alien words under her breath as she accessed diagnostics. Rowan's heart thudded. "So," he ventured, clearing his throat, "how do we broadcast the proof? And what exactly does it look like?" Myra hesitated, then gently inserted a fingernail into a nearly invisible seam on the device's surface. It opened like a blossoming flower, revealing a swirling pool of holographic data in miniature. The display glowed with alien symbols and diagrams that looked like anatomical cross-sections. Only the subjects weren't entirely human. "These are files on Oranth's attempts to manipulate empathic organisms," she explained, her tone grim. "They engineer beings with heightened empathic and growth-catalyzing abilities, like me. Then they forcibly imprint them with subroutines that ensure obedience." Rowan watched in muted horror as the holographic files flipped, revealing horrific images of sterile labs and rows of pods housing half-grown humanoid forms. "This is vile," he said softly, leaning closer. Myra's voice tightened. "To Oranth, we're just prototypes. They discovered that individuals like me could influence plant life, calm aggression among certain species, and serve as living interfaces for negotiations. But behind the facade of diplomacy, they plan to upgrade us for infiltration or warfare." A bitter silence fell before Rowan asked the question nagging at him. "If you broadcast this, do you think it'll genuinely force the authorities to act? Oranth has money, power, and media influence." Myra tapped on the table, eyes flicking with determined light. "Maybe on Earth they can stifle it. But this data will also reach interplanetary coalitions that rely on open commerce. If Oranth is exposed for slavery and illegal modifications, they'll lose major trade partnerships, possibly face sanctions across multiple galaxies." She paused, lifting her gaze. "It won't fix everything overnight, but it'll start a chain reaction, enough to give others like me a chance to break free." Rowan swallowed hard, nodding. "So we need an untraceable broadcast station, or they'll pinpoint us," he said. "I have an idea. There's a communications tower near the industrial park. My uncle used to do ham radio experiments with the caretaker. If we can sneak in, maybe we can connect your device to a large-scale antenna for a stronger, faster upload." Myra's eyes gleamed, approving. "That would give me seconds instead of minutes. But it might be enough." Before they could strategize further, someone knocked on the door. Not the brisk, robotic rap of Aranth agents. No, this was the rapid staccato of Ms. Angelino's well-known brand of impatience. "Rowan? Honey? You home?" came her muffled voice. Rowan groaned under his breath. "The neighborhood watchdog strikes again," he murmured wryly, sharing a glance with Myra as he headed to answer. Opening the door a crack, Rowan forced a warm smile. Ms. Angelino, stocky in her late 50s and armed with a casserole dish, beamed back at him. Her gray hair was piled into a neat bun, and she exuded the type of determined cheer only found in small-town gossip queens. "Rowan, I noticed you've been out all day," she chirped, peeking past him into the hallway. "Wanted to drop off this lasagna for you and your, guest. It's the specialty my niece taught me." She punctuated the statement with a meaningful wink. Rowan felt heat rising to his cheeks. He sputtered a few thanks, accepting the casserole with both hands. Ms. Angelino took advantage of his occupied arms to peer even further over his shoulder. Is your cousin from out of state still here? I do hope you're showing her all the nice spots in Lunsford. Her tone held a suspicious note, as if she believed the cousin story about as much as Rowan believed in tooth fairies. Yes, yes, Myra's here, Rowan managed, doing his best to block Ms. Angelino's line of sight. She's resting. Got a bit carsick on the way home. He plastered on a concerned expression, hoping it would deter further inquiry. Instead, Ms. Angelino's round eyes flicked with sympathy. Oh, poor dear, she cooed. Let me just pop in to say hi. She started forward. Rowan nearly panicked. Actually, she just laid down, he said hastily, stepping into the gap. I wouldn't want to wake her. Ms. Angelino patted the side of the dish, apparently deciding she'd done her neighborly duty by delivering food. All right, she relented, though her curiosity practically radiated off her. You be sure to let me know if you need anything. We can't have your guest feeling unwelcome. She cleared her throat, lowering her voice. And darling, there have been these weird flying things around your house the past few days. Drones or something. Very unsettling. Should I report them to the Homeowners Association? Rowan forced a tight laugh, trying to keep the casserole from slipping out of his grasp. No need, he lied. I think they're just some new-age pest control prototypes the city is testing. Ms. Angelino's eyebrows rose so high, they vanished into her hairline. Really? I've never heard about that. Well, if they cause trouble, I'll take pictures with my phone and call someone. Her voice carried the steel resolve of someone who lived for the slightest whiff of scandal. Appreciate it, Rowan said in a hasty sigh. He offered her a final smile, nodded, and gradually closed the door until she stepped back, looking reluctantly satisfied. Once locked, Rowan released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He glanced down at the casserole, the tang of tomato sauce tickling his nostrils. We might as well enjoy dinner, he muttered, setting it on the coffee table. From the hallway, Myra emerged, her expression caught between amusement and nerves. That neighbor of yours is thorough, she commented. At least she seems genuinely concerned. Rowan nodded. She's nosy, but she means well. Also, she's about the only reason Oranth can't just waltz in with a SWAT team. Half the neighborhood would be on their lawns in minutes, snapping photos. Myra gave him a rueful smile. Small mercies. Now let's map out how to reach that communications tower before they catch on. They set the casserole aside to cool and found themselves in the living room, hunched over Rowan's laptop. Myra quietly pulled up a map of the industrial district on one half of the screen, while on the other half she monitored the newly repaired translator core. Scraps of data scrolled across it, encrypted signals, cosmic timestamps, references to distant star systems. Rowan tried not to get distracted by the sheer magnitude of what they were handling. This was no longer just about protecting one person from a powerful corporation. They were on the cusp of exposing, on a galactic scale, the horrors Oranth had been orchestrating behind carefully closed doors. So the tower caretaker used to let my uncle broadcast ham radio signals to a small community of hobbyists, Rowan explained, pointing to a squat building on the map. He always complained the city didn't maintain it well, so it's basically a glorified metal scaffold. But it's tall and sturdy enough for us to splice your device into the main antenna. We might get decent range. Myra studied the map, tapping her chin thoughtfully. We need a quick upload. Less than 5 minutes. After that, Oranth will probably zero in on us. She paused, an unspoken question hovering. Are you sure we should risk this? If Oranth catches us in the act, the retaliation might be harsh. She remembered how they'd threatened Rowan by mentioning repercussions for neighbors. Rowan inhaled slowly, recalling his uncle's gentle wisdom about standing up for what mattered. I'm sure, he said. We can't wait for a perfect plan. They're probably ramping up efforts to corner us. We do this tonight, or we might never get another shot. Myra's eyes glimmered with a surge of steely resolve. Then tonight it is. Under cover of darkness, we'll slip into the tower, link the device, and broadcast everything. If luck is on our side, we can slip away again before Oranth arrives. Plan set, they decided to rest, waiting for nightfall. Myra took the opportunity to retune the translator core, ensuring it interfaced seamlessly with Earth's primitive radio tech. Rowan heated Ms. Angelino's casserole, then sat in silence, half-heartedly picking at the meal. Despite being quite good, savory layers of sauce, cheese, and noodles, his appetite was overshadowed by the looming threat. He noticed Myra wasn't eating much either, though she tried a small portion with polite curiosity. When darkness finally settled, they dressed in subdued colors. Myra in black leggings and a navy jacket, Rowan in a dark hoodie and cargo pants. Myra's disguise flickered occasionally, revealing a hint of the soft violet undertones on her neck, so she pulled on a baseball cap for extra concealment. The tension was palpable as they exited the house through the back door, mindful of any drone presence. To their relief, the sky was empty, yet the silence felt almost too serene. They slipped into the pickup, moving with hushed efficiency. Driving across town at night, the streets quiet, Rowan found himself recalling the surge of bravery he'd felt when he first confronted Myra in the garden. It occurred to him that in the short span since that evening, he had accepted responsibilities and risks he'd never have imagined. But each time he questioned that choice, he remembered the horror of those lab images, a reminder that no one deserved to be treated like a pawn in a corporate chess game. Their headlights cut through the darkness as they neared the industrial park. The old comm tower stood at the heart of a fenced lot, its skeletal frame illuminated by a few flickering floodlights. A chill wind whipped through the truck's windows, and Rowan shivered slightly, though he suspected it was less about temperature and more about adrenaline. "We're almost there," Myra said softly but firmly. "Let's hope we're faster than Oranth's hounds." The industrial park was eerily quiet under the pale wash of moonlight. A distant hum of freeway traffic underscored the silence, and the towering shapes of abandoned warehouses loomed like sleeping giants. Rowan eased his pickup behind a vacant loading dock, killing the engine and lights. Ahead, the chain-link fence around the communications tower stood in stiff silhouette, topped with rows of barbed wire. A single street lamp flickered intermittently, adding to the uneasy ambiance. Clutching the newly repaired translator core against her chest, Myra surveyed the area from beneath the brim of her borrowed cap. She exhaled a trembling breath. "No patrols, no sign of Oranth. Maybe we beat them here," she whispered. Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even if no drones hovered overhead. The entire scenario felt too convenient. Still, time was of the essence. If they hesitated, they would lose the chance to expose Oranth's darkest secrets to the galaxy. They slipped from the truck, keeping low as they crossed a patch of gravel. From a tool bag, Rowan produced wire cutters. "Here goes nothing," he murmured, snipping a discreet gap in the fence behind a shrub. Despite a few squeaks, the metal links gave way smoothly. He beckoned Myra through first, then followed, trying not to think about the many ways this could go wrong. The tower's base was a small, dilapidated structure once used for radio control. A single rusting door barred the way. "Locked," Rowan said, testing it. Myra placed a palm against the doorframe, closing her eyes. After a moment, she nodded, stepping back. With sudden purpose, thick vines emerged from beneath the cracked concrete, winding up and around the lock mechanism. Metal groaned and the door popped open. Rowan glanced at Myra in amazement, recalling how she had once made entire rows of vegetables sprout with a touch. Tonight, that gift was repurposed for a stealthy break-in. Inside, the air smelled of dust and stale electronics. A single console sat at the far side, festooned with switches, meters, and dials that had seen better days. Overhead cables ran the length of the room, presumably connecting to the antenna that stretched high above. Myra set the translator core on the console, a faint glow radiating from its center. "I'll need a couple minutes to interface with these outdated systems," she whispered. "Once the upload starts, there's no going back." Rowan nodded, adrenaline pumping. He hovered near the door, listening for any sign of approaching footsteps or humming drones. Myra's fingers fluttered over the console and the translator core with unearthly finesse, bridging centuries of technological difference in seconds. She glanced over her shoulder. "I'm starting the link now," she said, voice tight. "If Oranth's watching, they'll catch on the moment data floods off-world." A low hum filled the cramped room as the translator core's holographic interface flared to life. Alien script and spinning orbs of data projected into the air. Myra tapped rapidly and a progress bar materialized, pulsing from 0 to 10%. Rowan tried to slow his breathing. This was it. the moment they revealed Oranth's secrets to the entire cosmos. He risked a quick look outside. The moonlit yard remained empty. For a fleeting heartbeat, he dared hope they would finish without resistance. But hope was short-lived. At 22%, Myra stiffened. "They've found us," she said, reading some invisible interface. Almost on cue, a mechanical whine pierced the quiet night. From behind the fence, two black drones rose, luminous red lenses glaring like malevolent eyes. "Upload's locked in," she hissed, returning her focus to the console. "But we need time." The drones circled the tower in tight arcs, their spotlights lancing through the chain-link fence. Then, as if summoned by an invisible command, half a dozen dark-clad figures emerged from the shadows. It was impossible to see their faces beneath featureless helmets that gleamed in the moonlight. These were no standard security guards. Their movements had a precise synchronization that suggested advanced training, or possibly advanced programming. "Stay behind the console," Rowan called to Myra, grabbing a length of metal pipe from the floor, apparently left behind by some long-ago maintenance crew. He had no illusions that a pipe offered much defense against Oranth's advanced weaponry, but he refused to cower. One of the helmeted figures leveled an odd-looking rifle at the tower's flimsy entrance, and a shrill crack of energy seared the air. Sparks rained down from a newly melted hole in the door. "Hand over the device," boomed a distorted voice through a built-in speaker. "Failure to comply will result in immediate termination." Rowan's heart pounded. He turned toward Myra, who was still hunched over the console, frantically navigating some error message. "We're at 40%, she hissed. "Stall them if you can." Swallowing hard, Rowan crept to a window, pipe in hand. The attackers had spread out, forming a blockade. Another sizzling crack. This time, a small spherical drone zoomed through the granite in the door. It whirred, scanning the interior with a menacing red beam. Before Rowan could think of a better plan, Myra sprang into action. She laid a glowing palm on the concrete floor, and a ripple of life shot through the cracks. Within seconds, thick creepers and twisted roots erupted, tangling around the drone's rotors. With a metallic shriek, the device sputtered to the ground in a shower of sparks. Outside, the lid figure barked fresh orders to the others. Several more drones descended, smashing through windows. Rowan took a swing at one, denting its chassis, but sending a painful vibration up his arms. Meanwhile, Myra's creeping vines wriggled with a life of their own, ensnaring each piece of hostile tech that came too close. Sweat beaded on her brow. Maintaining such intense control over Earth's flora was clearly taxing, especially as she tried to keep the upload going. The attackers switched tactics. One fired a concentrated laser beam that sliced through layers of vines, leaving them smoldering. Another ignited a handheld flamethrower, spewing arcs of fire that incinerated the creeping roots in seconds. Rowan felt his stomach lurch. "They're burning the plants!" he shouted. Myra's face contorted with anger, and she clenched her fist, calling forth more growth from beneath the tower. But the corners of her eyes shone with desperation. They were outgunned, with no easy exit. Just then, a thunderous explosion rocked the fence line. Something big crashed against the chain-link barrier, scattering sparks into the night. Rowan ducked, shielding his face. Once the dust cleared, he dared a glance outside. A second wave of figures, alien in appearance, were engaging Oranth's forces. Tactics had changed in an instant. A tall, spindly form of living crystal lunged at one of the attackers, while another figure, seemingly liquid metal, slithered across the ground, toppling Oranth soldiers by taking out their legs. "Incoming friendlies!" shouted a voice from among the new arrivals. Rowan recognized neither the language nor the face, but he clung to the phrase as hope. Myra gasped, her eyes briefly going wide with recognition. "The resistance," she murmured, voice cracking with relief. "They found us." In the courtyard, chaos reigned. Drones buzzed overhead, their beams lancing at the newly arrived fighters. But these newcomers moved with stunning agility and coordination. The living crystal being, each facet shimmering under the harsh industrial lights, raised spiny arms that refracted a single beam of laser fire into a dazzling spray, scattering it harmlessly in multiple directions. Meanwhile, the liquid metal ally darted through the scattering lasers, punching holes in Oranth's formation. A third figure, made of what looked like ever-shifting paper folds, flitted between the corporate soldiers. disarming them with swift, blurring movements. Rowan's chest tightened. These were truly alien allies, yet they displayed an unmistakable camaraderie with Myra's cause. He spotted one of them gesturing toward the tower entrance, as though signaling Myra to hurry. Outside, the Orinth troopers regrouped, launching a volley of concussive grenades. The ground shook, shattered glass cascaded from the remaining windows, and for an instant, Rowan lost sight of the attackers. At the console, Myra's voice trembled. "We're at 80%, she called. "I can't abort or the partial files will corrupt. We need another minute." Rowan ground his teeth, scanning for some way to buy time. He sprinted to the battered door, pipe in hand, and peeked outside. The Oranth line was in disarray, pinned down by the Resistance fighters' relentless onslaught. He glimpsed a figure in corporate black trying to slip around the flank, hoisting that same flamethrower from earlier. With a surge of adrenaline, Rowan dashed out to intercept. He slammed the makeshift weapon down on the trooper's wrist, sending the flamethrower clattering. The trooper reeled, swinging a stun baton that nearly grazed Rowan's ribs. But Rowan ducked, hooking his foot behind the trooper's knee, toppling him onto the gravel. Within seconds, creeping vines, some combination of Myra's power and the local weeds, ensnared the trooper's legs, locking him down. Panting heavily, Rowan backed toward the tower. He risked a glance upwards. Several new drones soared in, sleek, triangular machines that glowed with faint blue lights. They weren't Aranth's style, and in a moment, Rowan's suspicion was confirmed. The triangle drones opened fire on Aranth's black scouts, neutralizing them mid-air with expertly placed pulses of energy. The cavalry had arrived in the skies too. He dashed back inside to see Myra hunched over the console, her entire frame shaking. Purple streaks glimmered through her disguise, testament to the toll her powers were taking under fire. 95%, she rasped. A sudden wave of feedback screeched from the console speaker, and the interior lights dimmed. Something was overloading. With a cry, Myra slapped the console, coaxing its failing circuits to hold on just a moment longer. Outside, Rowan heard the crunch of footsteps on debris and a harsh, metallic voice snarling, "Fall back! Fall back!" The Oranth troopers' lines broke as the Resistance fighters pressed forward. Another blast rattled the tower's walls, spurring Rowan to rush to Myra's side. She keyed a final command, and with a brilliant flash, the translator core's holograms vanished, replaced by a single green icon that pulsed. Upload complete. Myra sagged with relief, her trembling hands slipping away from the console. "It's done," she breathed, scarcely able to believe it. "All of Oranth's data is out in the open now. Every lab report, every hidden project, every crime." She closed her eyes as if summoning the last vestiges of her strength. "Let's get out of here before they blow us to bits." Rowan nodded, gently helping her to her feet. The pair stumbled out of the ruined doorway into a night lit by small fires, drifting smoke, and sizzling wreckage. Resistance fighters milled about, subduing the few remaining Oranth troopers. Two of the newcomers spotted Rowan and Myra, bounding over with inhuman grace. Up close, the differences in their physiologies were striking. One was the crystalline figure, radiating prismatic light, while the other stood taller than Rowan by a full head, his limbs appearing metallically fluid. "Operative Myra?" the crystalline one asked, voice chiming like wind through glass tubes. "We are the Allied contingent assigned to extract you from Earth. Your broadcast gave us the opening we needed. Oranth's command chain is already in disarray." Myra bobbed her head, halfway between a bow and a nod. "Thank you. This is Rowan, who risked everything to help. We owe him safe passage, too." Rowan's chest warmed at her words, though a prick of apprehension gnawed at him. "Extract?" he echoed, glancing around the smoldering courtyard. "As in, off this planet?" The fluid metal fighter gave a nod that made his torso ripple. "Yes, Oranth will be furious at the leak. They'll mobilize forces to contain the damage or silence anyone involved. You and Myra can't remain here if you value your lives." Rowan's mind swirled, picturing his humble house, the greenhouse, and the endless hours spent coaxing seeds into bloom. Could he really abandon that world forever? But he knew the alternative. Staying would make him a permanent target, and the risk might also endanger Ms. Angelino and others. Myra took Rowan's hand, a subtle current of reassurance pulsing from her touch. I'm sorry, she said in a voice that carried genuine sadness. I didn't mean to rob you of your home, but I can't leave you behind. Hey, Rowan said, swallowing the lump in his throat. We'll plant new gardens somewhere else, right? He tried to force a grin. But first, we still have to get out alive. Let's not jinx it yet. Myra managed a laugh, though tears shimmered in her purple-tinted eyes. The crystalline fighter gestured them toward a hovering craft that had settled in an open patch of lot. Its design was sleek and aerodynamic, lit by faint stripes of neon green. Hurry, we must depart before reinforcements arrive. A shrill clang erupted from behind them as the chain-link fence tore open. Two Aranth troopers, who had feigned defeat, lunged forward, weapons raised. Stop, one shouted, voice filtered through a damaged helmet. They loosed a volley of laser bolts that sprayed across the yard. Myra cried out, reflexively raising a hand. The surrounding asphalt buckled, and wild creepers ripped through, forming a tangled barrier. Rowan shielded his face from the heat as half the laser shots sizzled uselessly into vegetation. In a single fluid motion, the resistance fighters retaliated, disarming the troopers with blasts of cobalt energy. That final skirmish cleared, they sprinted to the waiting craft. It emitted a low hum that intensified as everyone boarded through a side hatch. Inside, Rowan gasped at the seamless, futuristic panels and glowing interfaces. Myra collapsed into a seat, doubling over with exhaustion as the plant barrier she'd created withered from disuse. The crystalline fighter tapped a control panel, and the vessel lurched skyward, leaving behind a yard strewn with unconscious or retreating Orinth enforcers. Through the viewport, Rowan watched the ground shrink away, the battered communication tower receding until it resembled a toy in a child's diorama. His stomach flipped. When they angled sharply, speeding beyond city limits, the light pollution fell away, revealing a vast night sky dense with stars. Is it wrong to feel guilty for leaving everything behind? He whispered half to himself. Myra lifted her head, eyes still glowing faintly. You're not leaving everything, she said gently. You're carrying the best parts with you. Memories, seeds, determination. You saved me, Rowan. We saved who knows how many others by exposing Oranth. She faltered, grimacing. And maybe one day when it's safe, we can come back to Earth. Rebuild your greenhouse. Show people that we're not the enemy. He gave a faint nod, trying to swallow the knot in his throat. The vessel's pilot, the same fluid metal figure, glanced over from the cockpit. Hold tight, he announced. We'll breach low orbit in less than a minute. The deck vibrated and artificial gravity wavered. Rowan suddenly felt weightless, pressed against his seat by the acceleration. Myra clasped his hand, and together they rode the surge into the upper atmosphere. As the blackness of space engulfed the viewports, Rowan stared in awe at the curvature of Earth below, swirled with clouds and shimmering with city lights. It struck him that for all its flaws and dangers, it was still home. Now it receded behind them with each second. A swirl of color at the edges of the window signaled the craft's advanced warp drive powering up. Prepare for jump, the crystalline fighter called, toggling the console. Outside, starlight distorted, stretching into streaks of luminescence. Rowan's ears popped, and the entire ship lurched with an electric jolt. One heartbeat later, they were surrounded by a kaleidoscopic tunnel of swirling colors, some phenomenon bridging them to a point far beyond Earth's solar system. Minutes passed in silence, each occupant lost in private thoughts about what they'd just escaped and what awaited them. Finally, the warp corridor collapsed, depositing the vessel in a region of dark space filled with unfamiliar constellations. Sensors pinged, and the pilot slowed them to a drift, floating amid the cosmic hush. Rowan blinked, trying to absorb the magnitude of it all. He was no longer on Earth. He might never see those quiet suburban streets or his carefully tended garden again. Yet Myra's presence steadied him. Beneath her exhaustion and the fading camouflage, he could sense her gratitude. You changed my fate, she said softly. I owe you more than you know. Rowan squeezed her hand gently. You changed mine too, he replied, recalling how dull his life had felt until she came crashing in with her borrowed tomatoes and cosmic secrets. I guess we're even. Hours later, though time felt elastic in space, they regrouped in a makeshift lounge at the rear of the craft. The crystalline fighter, who introduced himself as Prism, offered them water and nutrient bars. We've confirmed your broadcast reached multiple coalition governments, Prism said, their faceted limbs emitting subtle chimes with each movement. Responses are flooding in. Oranth's operations on Earth are now under intense scrutiny, and we've intercepted signals indicating key executives are being detained on distant worlds. That's a relief, Myra murmured, nibbling the edge of the nutrient bar. But there's still so much more to do. Her voice held a note of sorrow. Millions impacted by Oranth's manipulations. More hidden labs across the galaxy. My fellow empathetic interfaces forced into servitude. She trailed off, eyes reflecting old pain. Prism's features flickered with sympathy. Our network has waited for solid evidence to expose Oranth's illegal expansions. Your data is exactly the catalyst we needed. We can finally rally galactic authorities to intervene. The fluid metal pilot, who called himself Alloy, nodded. In time, we believe Oranth's stranglehold will loosen, and all those assets, like you, will find freedom. Rowan leaned forward, curiosity tempered by caution. So what happens to us? I'm no interstellar activist. I just grew tomatoes. Despite the tension in his voice, a half-smile played on his lips. Alloy's molten-like face shifted, seeming almost amused. Tomato cultivation might be in short supply on some worlds, he said. But we won't force you to become soldiers or spies. We only ask that you let us relocate you to a safe sector, away from Oranth's immediate reach. And if I wanted to fight back? Myra asked, brows knitted. Not just for me, but for everyone like me. I can't stand by while Oranth reassembles its power elsewhere. Prism's crystalline surfaces darkened briefly, a sign of serious thought. We would welcome your help. With your ability to bolster life and calm aggression, you'd be a valued asset to our cause. But we won't coerce you. Freedom means choice. Myra studied Rowan, searching his expression. You changed your entire life to protect me, she said softly. If you want to find a quiet planet, I won't hold that against you. Rowan let out a breath, heart twisting with conflict. I'm not sure how quiet my life could ever be after all this, he admitted. I've seen too much to pretend it's not happening. If there's a way to keep Earth and other worlds safe from corporate tyranny, I want to be part of it. A soft glow of gratitude lit Myra's features, the purple hue of her true complexion shimmering under the ship's interior lights. She placed a hand over Rowan's. We'll figure it out together, she whispered. In that moment, Rowan recalled how she'd once made his withering houseplant burst into fresh bloom. Perhaps she could guide whole worlds into renewal, nurturing life in places darkened by exploitation. Prism and Alloy exchanged a look, seemingly satisfied with the resolve they saw. Then let's chart a course for one of our safe havens, Prism offered. We can regroup there, plan how to leverage your broadcast. Myra can recover, Rowan can get to know our network. After that, the galaxy awaits. In the days that followed, the craft traversed hyperlanes and slipstream corridors that Rowan had never known existed. Myra regained her full strength and let her human disguise drop entirely, revealing again the ethereal lavender glow that had first startled Rowan in his garden. Free from pretense, she took quiet moments to speak with him about their future. Sometimes they flipped through the digital images Rowan had stored on his phone, photos of the greenhouse, the rose trellises, Ms. Angelino's suspicious grin at a neighborhood cookout. Each image was bittersweet, a reminder of the life they left behind. Word filtered in from across the cosmic channels. Oranth's top brass was scrambling to salvage their reputation, while multiple galactic institutions launched investigations into the corporation's off-world dealings. Prism predicted that, in time, Oranth would lose enough trade contracts to shrink in power, though pockets of resistance would surely remain. Meanwhile, Myra's data files, fully verified by independent analysts, circulated among coalition worlds, galvanizing new allies for the cause of ethical biotech. A wave of public outrage against the exploitation of engineered empaths swept through the interstellar community. Through it all, Rowan found himself awakening each morning, or what passed for morning in starship cycles, to Myra's gentle presence and a sense of growing conviction. He realized that while his uncle's old house and garden had once defined his sense of purpose, he now had a larger mission: to help Myra and those like her find a chance to grow, freely, without fear or corporate shackles. Strangely enough, the idea of stepping onto alien soil someday and planting seeds there thrilled him more than the complacent routine he'd known back on Earth. Finally, the day came when Prism announced they were dropping out of Slipstream near a sanctuary world. The planet filled the viewport with swirling green continents and broad oceans shimmering under two suns. "Welcome to Telson 9, Prism said. "We have a hidden base on the southwestern continent. It's not luxurious, but it's safe, and we can coordinate our operations from there." Touching down on a grassy plateau ringed by ridges of pale rock, Rowan inhaled the foreign air. It was thinner but carried an earthy scent reminiscent of freshly turned soil. Myra stepped off the vessel at his side, her eyes shining brighter than ever under the twin suns. "Feels like a new beginning," she murmured. In time, Ms. Angelino and the neighbors' reactions to Rowan's abrupt disappearance would become local legend. Authorities back on Earth would likely speculate that Rowan Gable had gone off-grid after a mental breakdown, perhaps driven by paranoid conspiracies about corporate drones. Only a handful of high-level officials might learn the truth, that Rowan and a fugitive empath named Myra had orchestrated a data leak of interstellar proportions, then vanished among the stars. "Think we can start a garden here?" Rowan asked, stooping to sift the alien soil through his fingers. Myra laughed, a sound like a soft melody echoing across the plateau. "We can try, though the tomatoes might need a few genetic tweaks." She turned to Prism and Aloy, who were busy offloading supplies. "But first, we have to fortify the base. We'll probably have to fight again, or Ranth's not going down without a struggle." Rowan nodded, straightening. "Well, every good garden starts by tilling the ground and pulling weeds, right?" Myra's grin widened, and she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're catching on quickly. Maybe after we handle the biggest weeds in the galaxy, we'll have time to watch our seeds grow." Her words hung in the air, ripe with the promise of future harvests. As they joined Prism and Alloy, Rowan felt his heart lift, brimming with hope. Whether on Earth or Telson 9 or some distant star, he and Myra would find a way to nurture life and keep it safe. For them, the quiet suburban life had ended, but in its place, an infinite universe of possibilities stretched out like a vast cosmic garden, waiting for them to plant the seeds of freedom and watch them bloom. Looking back, it's hard to believe how drastically one small garden became the focal point of a cosmic rebellion. From a quiet suburban lot to a frantic dash into orbit, this journey showed us that simple acts of kindness can spark changes bigger than we ever imagined. Personally, I find hope in the way our heroes overcame fear and sacrificed comfort for a righteous cause. Their courage reminds me we can all protect what we cherish, no matter the odds. If you followed this story from the late-night tomato theft to the epic final escape, thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share your opinions and any ideas you have about what might happen next. Comment below so we can discuss and explore new storytelling possibilities together. Until then, stay curious, keep dreaming, and never underestimate the power of a single seed.